Hey fellow knitters, welcome to my hexagonal knitting series. Clubkidknitter here. First off, I wanted to wish everybody a happy new year. I know it's a little bit late. The reason why I decided to make this series, this is actually the Persian Dreams blanket by Janice Hope. You can find it on Ravelry. I did put a link to it in the description section for this video. But these are some of the hexagons that I've made from the original pattern. So the original pattern has 6 charts in it, or 6 different hexagons. And I wanted to make this video because there aren't a lot of videos or tutorials out there on how to do this type of knitting. There are a couple, but it kind of really took a lot of trial and error to kind of get this down. So I wanted to make this video series for anyone who is interested in knitting this pattern. It's a beautiful pattern. It's one of the most beautiful patterns I've actually knitted. It is knitted in the round, and it's knitted starting from the center out to the sides. So typically when you knit in the round, like if you are knitting a sweater, or if you're knitting a hat, or perhaps socks, you always start from the outer edges, and then of course, like for example, if you're knitting a hat, then you reduce in the crown portion up to a point. So this is knitted opposite. It started in the center, and then you knit outward. Now this pattern, there are actually there's 2 versions of it. There's a fingering weight version, and then there's a worsted weight version. So these are all knitted with the fingering weight, and I decided to go with a dark background. So this is actually the navy color. That's what this color is here, and it's actually Knit Picks palette, and so that's what I decided to use for the background. And then for the foreground, or for the design, I'm using Knit Picks again fingering weight, but the chroma colors. So that's why you have this kind of this graduated colorway going on. The other thing that's really nice about that is, as opposed to doing the individual colors, is there are fewer ends that you have to weave in at the end. So that's nice. I've got 2 ends here I've got to weave in, and then there's this up here, which is the end. I've got to weave that in, and then this one here I've already woven in. I did that using the knit method. So all I have to do is just kind of tuck this down in between the floats in the front of the work, and just snip it. That'll be hidden. Now the other thing too is these floats here. What's really nice is through usage, these floats will actually felt. And the other thing that I did was I made the decision to catch my float. Any float that was at least 4 stitches long, I would catch it. I would always catch it on stitch 4. So if it's 5 stitches, I always catch it right dead in the middle on stitch 3. If it's 6 stitches in a row, I catch it on the 4th. Catch the float on the 4th stitch. So that's the nice thing about this. Now, I've broken this series up into a variety of sections. So obviously this is the introduction, but then you're going to move on to the next section, which is, or the next video, which is the pinhole cast on. I'll demonstrate how to do that. I'll demonstrate how to do the M1T, which is the make one towards. That'll be another video in the series. And then I'm doing a video on the two-handed method for knitting Fair Isle. That's my preferred method. So basically where you're holding your needles in both hands, and you're knitting continental with your left hand, and then you're knitting English with your right hand, and that's done simultaneously. So I'll show you guys how to do that, or anyone who's interested in doing that. And then I'll do a video on how to catch floats. I think there are 2 or 3 ways. I definitely know of 2 ways to catch floats. One is using the twisting method, and then the other is using the weaving method. I prefer the weaving method over the twisting method because obviously when you twist, when you pick up each yarn to knit with, and then of course you do a twist when you want to catch a float, you end up having to pause your work, and then you have to unwind or untwist your 2 working yarns, and that can literally double the time it takes to knit one of these. So I prefer the weave-in method. In that way you don't have to untwist your yarns. Now the other video that I'm going to make for you guys, and this is completely an optional video, it's using multiple magic loop. So when I start this, start a square or not a rectangle, hexagon for you guys, I'll start off doing magic loop. And then after I kind of knit a little bit, so maybe like this right here, then I will switch to multiple magic loops. I don't like using DPNs because they always, for me, they always slide off of my stitches. And I've always had a problem regardless of what type of knitting I've tried to do with that. So I always use magic loop to knit with in the round. But I'll demonstrate how to use multiple magic loops, and that way each side has its own designated needle or cord. Now you most certainly can use DPNs. If you do, I recommend using a total of 7. So you'd have 1 needle or 1 DPN for each of the 6 sides, and then you're going to have a 7th needle to exchange with as you knit in the round. Now the pattern states that you can use magic loop, and then eventually you can transfer your stitches to a 24-inch circular needle, and the 24 inches will actually hold all of the stitches because again you're knitting in the round. So that is obviously another method that you can use if you're comfortable with that. But I decided to make that optional video for anyone who is interested. You know, if you don't like it or if you don't prefer it, that's certainly fine, but just wanted to show everyone kind of yet another way to knit in the round. And then I will make a video on how to block these. I actually wet block these, and then I will make a video on how to seam the edges together, because you actually seam them together using the Kitchener stitch. So these are all live stitches, and I'm holding them on this red wool right here. So when I'm ready to start grafting these, because again it's going to be an invisible seam, I'll put these live stitches back onto needles, and then I'll sew in the Kitchener stitch. So I'll demonstrate how to do that. Now the other thing is I mentioned that there are 2 versions of this pattern. There's one for fingering weight that I just talked about, and then there's also a version for worsted. You don't want to use the worsted version on these particular patterns because they would be huge. They would be absolutely huge, which actually if you want to do that, I'm sure that's completely fine. But Janice did actually make a set of charts for the worsted version. And again, all of this is on Ravelry. Now, the other thing that she made available is expansion packs. So there's an expansion pack for this one here. Now this one is actually done with 55 rounds, and as far as the increase method, you're not increasing every other row or every other round. You are increasing, and then you are knitting the next round, and then increasing, and then knitting the next round, knitting the next round, increasing. So the way the increases are done, they kind of switch at certain points, and then you have additional rounds of knitting in between those switches. She does make a version, and it's actually her second expansion pack, that has, I think it's 24, it's either 18 or 24, but in any event, they are done, the increases are done literally every other round. So it's increase, knit, increase, knit, increase, knit, and so on. Now, the reason she did that is because when you do the first method of increases, that makes your work kind of dome up. And of course, you see that these are flat. And the reason why these are flat is I really, really loosened my floats when I was going in the round, because there's a natural tendency to make your floats a certain tension. And when you do that, it really causes it to kind of dome up, almost like a tam, if you will. So the way that you get these to lay flat is you really, really loosen your floats. And then, of course, the other thing that you do to also help in keeping these completely flat is wet blocking. So the wet blocking will actually achieve that for you. So these were really kind of domed before I did the wet blocking, but they do actually lay flat. Now, if you are having trouble with your tension, and no matter what you try, it still domes up, or it might dome up later after they've been blocked the first time, she does make a flat version of the hexagons. And again, the flat version is where you're doing the increases every other round. And because of that, it's an even increase. And so it does lay completely flat. So again, if you're having trouble with this version, you can most certainly try the expansion pack and get your desired results. But these have been blocked for a couple of months, and they've remained flat. So that's the beauty in wet blocking, especially with wool. Wool is very forgiving when it comes to blocking. It really loosens up the fiber. Okay, so that's the end of the introduction. If you want to go ahead and move on to the first video in the series, and I will demonstrate how to do the pinhole cast on to get you started.